Good evening and welcome to our final PNF Presents this year. It's the PNF Presents the Branches of SACS Family Tree. I've been at SACS for 6 years and I'm very much looking forward to learning how all the different parts are connected. If you're tuning in for one of the first times, I'm Helen Carson and I'm the PNF President for this year. So I'll be doing a brief introduction and then explaining who I'm handing over to and how the evening works. So we're very honoured this evening to have 4 fantastic speakers join us on our panel. We've got the Reverend Kanishka Raffel. He's Chairman of the School Council and Dean of St Andrew's Cathedral. Miss Nicola Warwick-Mayo, who's one of our Executive Director of School Services, and she'll be explaining all about her role and the different parts of SACS that she's involved with. Then we've got Dr. John Collier, who, as you all know, is our head of school. And then Lynn Jarvis, our Director of Community Engagement. And she'll be explaining all about how the OAA fits in, how the community and the PNF all fit in to help run our school as well as it does. So Lynn will explain in a little while the format of the evening and how you can all ask questions later on after our panellists have all given us a little insight into how they fit in. So we'll hand over to Lynn in a little while. A few general PNF bits of information. We have our AGM coming up on Tuesday the 24th of November, which actually is a slightly different day in our school calendar due to our Year 12 formal being able to be held on the 17th. So the 24th at 6 p.m. we'll have our AGM, and that will be just before our last meeting of the year, our last general meeting, which will start at 6:30 after that. So with the AGM, we're actually looking for quite a few new people to join us on the exec. A number of them will be stepping down as their children enter Year 12, so they'll have a shorter year next year. So if you're at all interested, please do feel free to email me at the PNF email if you want to contact me and discuss anything to do with those roles. And also we'll be looking for nominations, so if you email the PNF, if you do have somebody you want to nominate, and then I can send you out a very short form just to fill in to send the nominations in. So the agenda of both those will come out in the next PNF newsletter, which will be out shortly. But if there's anything you want to know, please get in touch because we'd love to have you join us. So with those few little bits of information over, I'll now hand over to Sally Sternecker, who's our conveners coordinator, who's going to say our acknowledgement of country to start off the meeting. So thanks, Sally. Over to you.
Thanks, Helen. I wish to acknowledge that I'm attending this virtual PNF meeting from the land of the Camaragal people of the Eora tribe. I also acknowledge the traditional custodians of the various lands from which other attendees are meeting at this virtual PNF meeting. I also acknowledge any Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people who are participating as well. I pay my respects to elders, past, present and emerging. I now hand over to Nicole for the prayer.
Thanks, Sally. Heavenly Father, we ask for your blessing on our school, the families and our community. Lord, grant us the will to work together, the wisdom to listen to each other's views and the insight to plan together. Help us to build a community that supports our staff, students, family and friends at St Andrew's Cathedral School. We pray for those who are preparing for their final exams and ask for diligence in study that is surrounded by a calm confidence in you and your provision. Through Jesus Christ our Lord. Amen. I'm just going to hand over now to Lynn, who is our Director of Community Engagement, and she will introduce the format for this evening. Thanks, Lynn.
Thanks, Nicole. Good evening, everyone. So this is our last PNF Presents for the year. So we have a group of panellists, so they're all going to do a short presentation explaining the different branches of the SACS family tree and how it all sort of connects in together. There's an opportunity for you to ask questions. So there's a Q&A panel there where you can type in any questions. You can choose whether you want to be anonymous or your name. You can also have a look at the other questions that have been posted. And if there's a question that someone asks that you think's a really good question, if you give it a like, that gives us an opportunity to see which ones are the most popular, just in case we get inundated. And so after all the panelists have presented and given you an overview of the topic tonight, then we'll run through that Q&A. So there's a little bit of opportunity there to interact through the team. So that's how it all works tonight. And we're going to start off with Nicola Warwick-Mayo. So she's the Executive Director of School Services. So I think Dr. Collier normally describes her as the deputy for all the non-teaching parts of the school. Thanks, Nicola.
Thanks, Lynn. Hello, everyone. So I'm going to start large and try and focus our attention gradually towards the school and how we fit into the broader context. So firstly, we have in Australia an Anglican church. So it's called the Anglican Church of Australia, and that has about 23 dioceses in it, of which Sydney is one. So Sydney is a diocese as part of those 23 dioceses in Australia. And it's one of the largest dioceses, in fact, when you think about how many parishes there are in Sydney. It's about 270 parishes within Sydney Diocese, which makes it a pretty big one compared to the rest of Australia. So we like to say that the Anglican Church is episcopally led. So it's led by the Archbishop of the diocese, and then he has some assistant bishops to help him with that, to administer the affairs and to lead the affairs of the diocese in Sydney, the Anglican Church in Sydney. But we're governed by what's called a synod. So the synod is a representative group of all the parishes in Sydney. It's got about 800 members, which is a pretty big group of people gathering together. I've said it's parish representatives plus some of the organisations as well have representation on synod. And that meets once a year to govern the affairs of the diocese. For the rest of the year, you might think that nothing happens, but actually they kind of delegate their authority to something called standing committee, which is sort of a subset of representatives on synod and has about 55 members, which is a lot more manageable. Still a lot of people to have a Zoom meeting with once a month. But it's a bit more effective. So how do they execute their functions? They really do two things. They ordain things, so create ordinances, which are kind of like laws that govern how things operate in the diocese and how things operate in the church in Sydney. And that has things to do with some of the organisations that run within the Sydney diocese. Has things to do with church property, might be things to do with child protection, all those things that really help the good order of the church in Sydney. And then it also makes resolutions about things, so it might express views about various matters. So that's how the church in Sydney is governed. But one of the things that Synod makes ordinances about is schools. So you want to move to the next slide. There's a bunch of schools that you may recognise that are all Anglican schools in our diocese. And they are kind of same in that they're Anglican, but of course they're a little bit different as well. So why don't we have a chat about the differences between the different sorts of Anglican schools in Sydney. So firstly, there's diocesan schools. So these are schools that are established under an ordinance of the Synod. If you want to put the next, click again, thanks. The Synod and the school appoint the council members of those schools, and the school reports annually to Synod, and it's subject to Synod policies. So the schools run effectively independently because they have a council, they have their own governing sort of body, but they're under the umbrella of Synod and so are subject to Synod policies. SACS is a diocesan school, but it's not quite the same as the other diocesan schools. We're a little bit special. We've been established by the Cathedral because we are in fact St Andrew's Cathedral's school. So we operate under an ordinance of the Synod, but it's the Cathedral's ordinance. So it also governs how some of the way that the Cathedral operates as well. Our council members are predominantly appointed by the Cathedral chapter, not by Synod. But we also report annually to Synod, and we're also subject to Synod policies. Another group of schools within the diocese are schools that have been set up under the Anglican Schools Corporation. So the Anglican Schools Corporation is an organisation that's been established by Synod, and it owns and operates 16 schools within the diocese. So this is schools maybe like St Luke's in DY and Roseville College. They're some of the Anglican Schools Corporation schools. And then there's other Anglican schools. So the first three were all schools that were kind of under the umbrella of Synod, but there's a bunch of Anglican schools out there as well that have been established independently of Synod. They're often companies limited by guarantee, which is a bit different from the diocesan schools and other schools that we've spoken about. And they don't have to report to Synod. So schools like Meriden, for example, or Cranbrook, they're Anglican schools, but they aren't under the Synod umbrella.
All right, thank you, Nicola, for that. Now I'm just going to introduce Kanishka Raffel, who is the Dean of St Andrew's Cathedral, and he's also Chair of our School Council, and he's going to explain a little bit about our relationship between the school and the Cathedral, and then about the School Council. Thanks, Kanishka.
Thank you, Lynn. Good evening, everybody. Thanks so much for being here, and thanks to Helen and the whole team for everything that the PNF does. We're very grateful indeed for the contribution of parents and friends to our community life and everything that we enjoy as part of the Cathedral School. So thanks so much for that. And it's a pleasure to be able to speak to you tonight. For a start, I've learnt a great deal from Nicola just now about the diocese, so it's never too late. My task is to just describe for you the relationship between the Cathedral and the school and the way the School Council operates. So the Cathedral and the school, of course, have a very long relationship because the school was founded as a ministry, if you like, of the Cathedral. I guess it's about 138 years ago now. Initially, as you may know, it was called the Choir School because it was formed to educate the choristers. That was its origins, and that's still reflected in the ordinance that Nicola referred to, because the ordinance describes the purpose of the school to be the education of choristers. So that historical link remains, but of course the school has grown in a wonderful way and to what it is today. But that relationship between the Cathedral and the school continues, I think, to be significant. And in fact, when I became Dean of the Cathedral in 2016, the council was having a conversation about whether it wanted to kind of separate itself from the Cathedral and come under the Synod, as Nicola was just describing, many of the schools. And in fact, people thought that the history of the school, the physical proximity which generates real aspects of relationship, students inevitably remember the Cathedral as part of their school experience, a significant part of that. We thought actually it was worth preserving our current governance. So the Cathedral and school, I'm delighted to say, have remained in close relationship and partnership. And that's been expressed, it's expressed in so many different ways, but of course, very recently in our joint project to refurbish the chapter house, which has been a really marvellous success. And as soon as COVID allows, we'll all get to see and enjoy that. So in a formal sense, Nicola has already outlined that the School Council or the governance of the school comes within the Cathedral Ordinance, and so the Cathedral is governed by the chapter. It's called the chapter. The Archbishop is the chair of the chapter. If it was a corporate structure, you'd call me the CEO, I suppose, the Dean of Sydney. That's my title, but the Archbishop is the chair of the chapter, which is the governing body of the Cathedral. Under the ordinance, the chapter appoints 9 members of the school council, 2 of whom are clergy, 7 of whom are lay, and following a recent amendment to the ordinance, 1 of whom must be an Indigenous person. The Archbishop also appoints 2 members of the school council, 1 clergy and 1 non-clergy, or lay as we call them, and the council appoints 2 members to itself, a former student and a current parent. The council elects its own chair, and since the middle of 2016, I've had that great privilege of being the chair. The Dean has often been the chair in the history of the school, but not always, and but currently that is the case. And of course, the head of school reports to the school council. So I occupy 2 positions, Dean of the Cathedral and chair of the school council, which means I've generally got at least 2 hats on, but advancing the interests of the school is key to both of them. So we call that complementary, mostly. Now, the school council is at liberty to organise its own affairs and business, and so it has chosen to create 4 committees: finance and risk, academic improvement, strategy and vision, and governance. The Finance and Risk Committee is chaired by Dr. Ben Waterhouse, who is actually the former student member of council. The Academic Improvement Board is chaired by Felicity Brazel, who is a parent, although she's not the parent member of council. Strategy and Vision is chaired by Ray Jarrett, who is Deputy Chair of the council, and the Governance Committee is chaired by Dr. John Scott, who is a former principal of another school. And so between those 4 committees, the council runs its agenda. I should say that the council of the Cathedral School is also the school council of the Gawara School, and Gawara, although we think of ourselves kind of being closely related, which is perfectly right, in a formal sense and an organisational sense, there are 2 distinct structures. And they, of course, have their own avenues of reporting to the educational authorities and so on. But the council of the Cathedral School serves also as the council of the Gawara School. That's not mandatory, but it is the way it's currently organised. And so there are meetings of the school council as well as meetings of the Gawara School Council, usually following one another several times a year. So I'll be around to answer questions at the end of the session, but I think probably I can leave it there for now.
Thanks very much, Kanishka. Next, we've got Dr. John Collier, so our head of school, who's going to try and explain a little bit about the organisation of the school and operations. So he'll talk a little bit about the school executive and how that functions with all the other groups. Thank you, John.
Thank you, Lynn and Helen, and good evening, everybody. Talking about structures probably appeals to people who like reading constitutions or who otherwise might choose the phone book as their bedtime reading. Nonetheless, it is helpful to understand how things work, and I shall do my best to explain that. And what I'm commenting on at this stage is the internals of the school, which is my area to discuss tonight. And already you've heard that there's not one school, but in fact 2 schools, and so I'm actually the head of SACS and the head of Warwick. and that can be quite confusing at times. And those two schools are joined at the hip. They're like Siamese twins, and they exist in the same space, that is here in St Andrew's House, with SACS also existing in the Bishop Barry Centre down the road. So we actually have 4 deputy heads, all of whom report to me. That might sound a rather extensive allocation, but bear in mind that we have over 1,400 students and approaching 330 staff, so it's a large operation. And those deputies are Mr. Brad Swivel, who is a kind of conventional high school deputy, which is probably a good way of explaining his role. Another is Dr. Julie McGonigal, who actually lives in England. And that might sound a tad unusual, and in fact it's very unusual. But in these days of online, a great deal can be done, and it doesn't actually matter whether Dr. McGonigal's online from England or around the corner. And she works very extensively in the area of policy and professional development, creating packages for us, and in mentoring staff and in leveraging our studies of our academic progress as a school, that is how the students are performing. She's written our staff performance appraisal instrument, and she currently works 4 days a week for SACS, but from the beginning of next year she'll work full-time for our school, having by then divested herself of her responsibilities, initially as Senior Vice Principal and then as Director of Teaching and Learning across a whole foundation group of schools in Northern England. Our third deputy is Mrs. Rhonda Robson, who is Deputy K6 and Director of Primary Education, which actually means that she supervises both the junior school and Gawara, as we've seen the advantage in giving Gawara the benefit of the huge school, that is our junior school of around 400 students that sits alongside it. And so Gawara benefit from the curriculum and pastoral expertise of the junior school staff. Our fourth person at deputies level is Miss Nicola Warwick-Mayo, who was our first speaker this evening. And indeed, she's in charge of just about everything except that which relates to teaching. And if you think everything in a school relates to teaching, then let me explain that there is a back room, so to speak, that's essential for the school to run. And that includes finance and risk identification and mitigation, and IT and community and events, and a whole host of areas. In fact, it may surprise you to know that we have around 100 staff in support and administration within the school. And if that seems a lot, bear in mind that we're a completely independent school, and so the responsibilities on us are virtually the same as the responsibilities on the whole Department of Education with its 2,200 schools. So we have to make our own way in terms of finance and compliance with government and legals and enrolments and marketing and all the rest of it. We stand independently by ourselves, and we are our own head office in that respect. Now, I have some other direct reports also, and they are the Director of Strategy and Marketing, Miss Jackie Eisnegger. So I gather together these folk, and we have senior executive meetings which often occur at unsociable hours for Dr. McGonigal in England, and she's been known to attend some meetings at 3 AM her time. We try not to do that to her very often. Within the school itself, we have 4 divisions, as we call them, and they are junior school, Gawara, which together form a kind of super division under Mrs. Rhonda Robson, with a deputy, in fact, in charge, middle school, led by Mr. John Partington, and senior college, led by Mr. David Lindsay. So each of these divisions exists to some extent as its own entity, and Mr. Swibble and I try to provide coherence and coordination across all 4 divisions so that we are recognisably one school, and so that there's good transition from junior school to middle school and middle school to senior college. Within the divisions themselves, there are essentially 2 function areas. The first is curriculum and teaching and learning together. And in the junior school, Mrs. Susie Moffat is responsible for that area. In the middle school, Mrs. Kate Lay, and in the senior college, Mrs. Eleni Tatsis for HSC and Mrs. Sharon Munro for International Baccalaureate Diploma. The corresponding area within each division is pastoral care. So within the junior school, Mr. Selwyn Wu is in charge of pastoral care, and in the middle school, year coordinators and supervisor of girls report to Mr. Partington. In the senior college, the heads of house report to Mr. Lindsay. And of course, there are tutors and school counsellors who also support those areas. We have 2 new positions this year, a head of student wellbeing in the high school, Mr. Derek Champion, and a head of student wellbeing in the junior school, Mrs. Bronwyn Wake. Now, if you think about all these leaders and about their gender, what you'll notice is that most of our senior staff are actually women. And that's not a policy based on gender. They've been appointed because they are the best